I think that like I'm such a huge advocate for mental health. Girl, you're talking to the right person. Okay. Like, like if and I always used to joke, if I was a Mrs. America, this would be my platform because like it's so hard. It's such a ripple effect. And I don't think people understand like you taking your own life is going to affect so many more people than just your immediate family. Like it's going to affect friends. It's going to affect their friends. It's going to affect your family and their friends. It's going to affect everybody. And I think that, you know, for one stupid problem that's minor, which is really, I think what it is, I think mental health makes it a bigger problem than what it really is. You know what I mean? And I think that like with my mom's case, honestly, she'd been depressed my whole existence, pretty much.
Yeah.
And as she got older, and she died at 54. And so as she got older, I think menopause was coming into play. And I think that was having a greater effect on her. And she was like also kind of smoking pot at that time too. And I think that was also doing it. And healthcare being what it was in 2010, she couldn't afford medicine.
Yeah.
Really.
I just mean, so people still can't in 2022. Like,
yeah, you know, I mean, you think that, I mean, especially over the pandemic, I mean, I cannot imagine having to live by myself and isolate and being completely alone and having some sort of mental health issue. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I have anxiety, like I am like anxiety girl, right? Like I freak out at the slightest thing that is of no consequence.
yeah.
You know, like I am a freak that way. And I'm really glad that I don't have the depressive side of things.
Yeah.
You know, my mom was of depression, my dad was anxiety. So I kind of lucked out only having that one. But I just think, you know, out of the smallest thing, like she was having issues with her boyfriend at the time. And she was not in a good place. And she worked for Home Depot at the time. They were amazing. Yeah. And they were amazing, but like she just was in a really bad place in relationships. Her and my dad had gotten divorced like 10 years before that. And I think that was her downward spiral. You know, and I just think that like what problem is so huge that you think that by ending your life, it's just going to end everything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It ends it for you, but it doesn't end it for everybody.
And that was like the whole point of it, like putting this platform is I'm like, I don't think that people notice everything that happens afterwards. Like, I'm like,
oh yeah,
of course it ends for them, but I'm like, there's so many people in their life that won't get answers that are always going to wonder what if that are going to, whether it's right. And not to say like bills, I'm like, that's a different side of the house, but I'm like, it just pushes off the pain to everybody else in their life that I don't know if people think about it.
I honestly don't think they do. Like she didn't leave a note. Like she had actually told me, so December 2009, she had actually told me like January 2010, I was going to kill myself before Christmas.
Okay.
And I was like, what?
Yeah. You know, you're like, what do you mean?
What? Yeah. Like I had just turned 30 in July of 2009. And so I'm like, what do you mean? Like, why would you do that? Why would you, you know, and my husband and I have been married almost 15 years and I have stepkids and they were super young when we got married. So like they were like 6 and 7 or somewhere like 7 or 8 or something. And they become attached to my mom because their mom really didn't pay enough. Like she was kind of, I don't know, she was weird with the kids. That's a whole other situation. Like, so my youngest stepkid, Marley, had become really attached to my mom. Because my mom was very like hippy dippy. She loved plants. Like, she could be prickly. Like I liken her to being a porcupine because she could be really prickly on the outside, but once you got to know her, she was like soft. Yeah. And I mean, she would do anything for anyone, but you know, the kids became really attached to her. So I was like, what, don't you want to see where my life takes me and where this life that I've built takes me? And don't you want to see, I mean, they're not your blood grandkids, but don't you want to see where they go and what happens? And like, why would you tell me this? Why would you tell, and she had actually, when she had moved back, so she was, sorry, this is a whole long story.
No, it's great.
Here
it's
for,
great.
right?
It's great.
So, okay, let me start at the beginning.
Okay.
We're getting into the nuts and bolts of the situation. Okay. So I'll start at the beginning and you tell me what you want to hear and what you don't want to hear, and I'll do whatever.
No.
So like her background. So she was born in 1955. She's a baby boomer. Grew up in a Mormon family in Utah, had 3 brothers, 2 sisters. My grandma had 2 relationships prior to my grandpa. So she had a half brother and a half sister, but they're their sister and brother for all intents and purposes. And she was kind of a weird kid. I guess she was really like, my grandma actually sent her to charm school.
Really?
Like where you learn manners and stuff, because she was just like a snot. I don't know, like my grandma wanted a girly girl and my mom was, but she wasn't, and she was kind of a shit.
Well, and it's so funny you think about it, because I'm like in 2022, I'm like, that's probably most female kids, but I'm like, I could see back in 1960 where you have a rebel.
Yeah. Like, my grandma was like this prim and proper, born in 1930 woman, wanting a girly girl. And so my mom just wasn't that way. She went her own way. And my grandpa, I think she might have gotten the depression from him because he fought in Korea.
Okay.
Landed on a landmine, blew up his leg. So he had to wear braces for the rest of his life on his legs. And was really depressed after that because he couldn't do a lot of the things that he was used to doing.
Yeah.
And he was a young man, in his 20s, and came back, married my grandma, and had my aunts and uncles and, my mom. And I think she might have gotten it from him, but, growing up, she just always had, she was loving, but she wasn't the most loving mom. Like we didn't say I love you or hug or anything like that. Excuse me, but she was, thank you. She was just, but she was my mom, she was a comfort, like most moms are to their kids. And she always had like a depressive side. Like there was always just something off. Like if her and my dad would get into a fight, she would run to my aunt, my uncle Steve's wife, my Aunt Susie. She would run to her house and hang out there. And like my Aunt Susie told my mom's sister, my Aunt Annette, like, you need to watch her because I think she could definitely do something to herself at some point. And she'd always said that to her. So it just kind of progressed. And I think, it just got worse as she got older. And honestly, and I hate to say this, but this is the conclusion I've come to over 12 years of living with this, is that no matter what I could have done for her therapy wise or medication wise, I think that the end result was unfortunately inevitable with her. Which is so sad. And I really think it's like that with a lot of people. And I hate to say that. That sounds so callous and mean.
But it is like some people have that mindset that you can't, I always say, I'm like, I can't help if you don't want to be helped.
Right.
Like I can't make you want it. Like I can want it so bad for you, but I can't make you find purpose if you don't want purpose.
Right. Well, it's like the people that, like the story of the guy jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge and he survived. And now his life mission is to be a suicide advocate, a prevention advocate, a suicide awareness advocate. And I just think like in that moment, they're so mindset on it.
Yeah.
But then, after that moment, I think, oh shit, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
Like this is not what I really want to do. And, but I just think with her, it was a gradual progression. So she moved, she started having like an internet affair back in the early 2000s, like 2001.
MySpace?
No, it was on, there's this game, right? Could you imagine? There was this game page called pogo.com.
Okay.
And like there's a bunch of games and stuff. Yeah. And like there's a bunch of games and you can have chats with people and like group chats and whatever. So she had found this group of people that she was chatting with. She'd found this guy and they started having like a weird little online affair.
Yeah.
And she told my dad, in probably like September, October of what was it? 2002, that she wanted to go to the redwoods and see the trees for her birthday, because her birthday was in October.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, that's fine if that's what you want to do. Well, then come to find out she's meeting this man because he lived in Northern California. And yes, and my aunt said that they had gone shopping and she was buying like all this lingerie and all this stuff. And my dad found out and he's like, if you leave, we're divorcing. Like, I'm not. And my dad was always a pushover with my mom. He really loved her. He took care of her. Like, she didn't have like to work if she didn't want to.
Yeah.
You know, she could stay home. I don't know if she felt trapped by that. You know, and I'm like a 23 at this time and heartbroken. My parents are getting a divorce and I'm like, I'm not a little kid, but I, you know, I'm
like your
like,
life's a lie because the past 23 years is
right. Like, what in the, what, like, what's happening? And so she left, he filed for divorce. And she's like, well, you know, she came back to get all of her stuff. My dad was heartbroken, like, and she came back to get her stuff. And she's like, I really was coming back. And I'm like, no, you weren't. And I told her that on the phone. I'm like, you're not going to come back. You're going to stay in California. And that's, oh no. And she ended up staying in California for a few years. And she, I think, was devastated that my dad actually filed for the divorce. I don't think she was expecting him to do that because she'd gotten away with, she never like cheated on him, but just her behavior of being prickly, or running away from, when they'd have like a disagreement on something, you know, just, I just think that she thought that he would be fine.
Get over it. And
but that was like the last straw for him. So she moved out to California in 2002. And then she ended up moving back in 2007 because the man that she was with ended up messing around on her.
Karma.
Right? You know, that sucks. Yeah, a little bit of karma. And she ended up moving back to Utah in 2007. Well, when she moved back, she was very suicidal. She moved in with my aunt, Annette.
Okay.
And she ended up taking like a whole bottle of something like Advil or I don't know, something crazy. And they ended up taking her up to the University of Utah in their psychiatric unit. They wouldn't give me any information on her because of HIPAA.
Yep.
I couldn't find out where she was. And I was like in tears. I'm at work. My now husband and I were like talking about getting a house and all this crazy stuff. And we ended up getting married that June, but like, it was just all this craziness happening. And so she ended up going to uni, is what we call it, the University Neuropsychiatric Institute. And then she got transferred down to another inpatient rehab mental health place. I think it's like, I can't remember what it was called, but I had a hard time finding her. And I was like, hey, what's going on? So I went and visited her and she just looked deflated. And they were giving her medicine and she said it was working and they were doing therapy sessions with her and everything. And she had a job. I mean, she worked for Home Depot in California and they transferred her to Utah. So she had a job. One of her good friends from high school had an apartment that she rented her. I mean, things were going well that way.
Yeah.
And, you know, and so she moved out, was still working her job. For some reason, couldn't afford the medication, even though she had insurance through Home Depot. And just kind of stopped. And then I thought she was fine. And she started dating this man that she worked with. And we really liked him. All the guys she's been like dated, even the guy she left my dad for, I really liked him, even though like it was, you know,
weird.
Like,
the situation is weird. Still the guy.
Sorry, my corgi is like losing her mind right now.
That's okay.
You're crazy. So, you know, I think that she started dating Don. Don was into drugs. He was into meth. She wasn't doing meth. She was just smoking weed. And their relationship was very volatile. Like, I mean, they would fight. And he was probably like 8 years younger than her. And they would fight and they would make up and they would have arguments. I think he may have at some point, she claims she fell down the stairs. I think he pushed her and, you know, I mean, just stupid stuff like this. And so towards the end of their relationship and towards the end of her life, they were fighting constantly. And she was coming to my house and staying at my house. And I just think that ruined her. I think that was just another nail for her in her coffin. I hate to say that, but you know, and she called the day she died. I had been awake And I worked in law enforcement in Utah, and that's how I met my husband, because he also worked in law enforcement. And
Okay.
I was awake at like 1 or 2 in the morning. It might even have been 3 in the morning because I wasn't feeling good. And she had texted or called or something. And I called her and I'm like, well, what's going on? She's like, I'm going to have to come stay at your house this weekend. I'm like, okay, well, what's happening? She's like, Don and I are having a fight and he wants me to move out. And I just need somewhere to stay till things blow over. I'm like, okay, that's fine. You
Yeah.
can come here. She's like, I'll come there. We'll go to Pier 1. I'll make dinners. We'll have fun. I'm like, okay. I'm like, but just so you know, you need to tell Don my house is not a hotel. And I wasn't meaning it mean, but I'm like, I'm an adult. You're an adult. Like,
Yeah, I'll help
figure this
you for
out.
days and then
Yeah, like you're 54 years old. Figure it out. And I wasn't mean about it, but I was like, yeah, but I want you to come stay. I want you to come, that's totally fine. And so she's like, okay, well, we'll do that. I'll, come over after you get off work and, I'll sleep and come over. I'm like, okay. I don't know. Excuse me. I don't know what happened between the time I talked to her and the time she left work and went home. But I mean, I know what happened, but I don't know in her mindset what happened. I don't know if she had a blow up with Dawn. I don't know. And so the next morning, I'm on my way to work and, I work at 8 o'clock and my phone is just, I look at my phone and I have like 10 missed calls from Dawn. Excuse me. Sorry. And I'm like, well, I'm on my way to work. Like, what does he want? I'm thinking like my mom left the house or something. And he calls me and I'm on my way to work and I'm almost to work at this point. And he calls me and he's like, hey, I just want to let you know that your mom hung herself. Right. And I'm like, I'm
what the hell?
Yeah. And I'm like, hey, what? I'm like, well, is she okay? Like, is she in the hospital? He's like, no, she's gone.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, what? Like, and then I start getting hysterical because this is my
Yeah.
mom. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean she's gone? Like, I don't know how to process this. Like, did you call the police? Like, what's going on? I'm like, I've got to get to work. I don't know. Like, I'm like,
You're like in shock.
freaking out. Yeah. And I don't know how I got off the freeway and actually drove to work because I was probably like 10 minutes away. But I pull into our office building, our sheriff's office building, and I'm sitting there and I'm calling Scott. I'm like screaming into the phone, like my mom killed herself. And then I have to call my dad. And then my aunt and I weren't really speaking at that time because we had some issue. And I called her and I'm like, I'm just letting you know my mom killed herself. And I called all these people and Scott's like, well, how did you get to work? Like go into work. And
you're like, I autopilot. I don't know.
Yeah. And I go into work and I think Scott had actually called my supervisor, my sergeant at the time, who had only been in our office for like a month, like, okay, what drama do I have to deal with now? And I come in the office and I just scream that my mom had killed herself. And my coworkers had come up and they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, she just hung herself, killed herself this morning. And my boss comes out and have this whole thing. Yeah. They're like, what? How did you get here? Why are you here? I'm like, I'll just stay at work and I can work and like, it'll be fine. And like, cause I'm the type of person where I need to like do something.
Get your mind off of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I don't like crying is my least, I mean, it's everybody's least favorite emotion, but I hate it. Like, I would rather laugh and have a good time than cry. So I'm like, no, I'll be at work. I'll be fine. And my boss is like, no, you need to go home. Like, I'm going to drive you home and I'll have one of the officers, take your car and follow me down to your house. And I'm like, but I live like 30 minutes away. Like, you're going to drive, like, are you sure? Yeah. And they're like, what do you mean? Are you sure? Like, you're going home. Yeah. And so, I mean, just the shock of it. Like, I didn't think, in your mind, you like think of it as like a movie, like, oh, she'll be fine. Like she was found in time. She'll be fine. Like, no, like nothing like that. And it was just so hard to comprehend. And like the days that followed, I don't remember much. Like, I remember having to go to the mortuary. I remember them going through the death certificate. They were like, well, do you want to know how she did it and what she did it with? And I was like, no, I don't want to know.
No, I don't want to know.
I don't want to know that. Well, my dad, who was there, was like, oh, she did it with an electrical cord, huh?
You're like, Dad.
I was like, why? I was pissed and I cussed him out right in front of the funeral director. And I was like, I just told you I didn't want to know.
Yeah.
And now you're telling me this. Like, I couldn't even go view her body because I couldn't, I just couldn't, and I kind of regret that, but I just couldn't handle it. Like,
Yeah.
you're my mom and you've just like ended your life. Like, I just think about that and I'm like, that was hard, like, uh, I don't know. And it still is weird. Like, I don't get as, I mean, if you'd have talked to me like 8 years ago, I'd probably be sitting here like, oh my gosh.
In tears. Yeah.
Yeah. You just kind of have to, it is what it is, unfortunately. And you just have to realize like it was her choice. I never felt really any guilt about it.
Yeah.
Which was really nice. Because I know a lot of people feel that.
Yeah.
But I know I did everything I could for her aside of holding her hand and to having her committed. Yeah. I mean,
yeah. But even then, it's like she's done that before and like she still made choices in her life that still got her back on the path and with Don.
Right. And so, and poor Don, he felt guilt. Like, he told me a story that he had he'd driven somewhere and he said he had doused himself in gasoline because he was going to kill himself. And he said every time I'd light a match, the match would go out. Like, he went through like a whole packet of matches.
It's like your mom was there.
Right. And I'm like, you just can't feel guilty. Like, you just happened to get into a relationship with someone who had some severe mental health, issues.
Yeah.
And it's not your fault. It's not my fault. She made the decision. And, unfortunately now we have to live with it. What I thought was really weird, and this is going to be morbid, but I'm like really like, I mean, law enforcement background, I'm into like true crime stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm morbid, but I wanted to, like, they gave me her stuff in like a bio bag, like her rings that she had on and her watches. And like, she hadn't even emptied her pockets. Like, she still had like her chapstick and her like change and like, all, you know what I mean? It was so I think it was very like split second decision.
Yeah.
She had smoked a cigarette and only smoked half of it. And then she had like a half drunk Gatorade on the stairs with her. So I'm like, was it like a split second decision for you that you just decided to do this?
Yeah.
I just thought that was super weird. You know what I mean? Like, how weird is, I mean, like, I think about myself, I'm like, I'd at least take like my jewelry off and like, I don't know.
Or like, your things out of your pockets or but
yeah, like, I know that's weird, but like, I just thought that was super strange. And I still have the biohazard bag. I can't open it. Like, her watch that she had on actually quit beeping maybe a couple years ago. Cause isn't that weird? Like, it would quit beeping. It like would send a beep on the hour. Yeah. Like, just a quick little, and it stopped doing that. And I'm like, I'm not opening that bag.
But I mean, it's still things that you have to remember her by. Even if it's in a bad light, it's
it's just hard. And I wish people knew, like, don't feel guilt. Like, you've done everything you could do for that person. And, and it's hard because we get so wrapped up in our own lives. We don't reach out to people. We don't check on people. And I think that's where the guilt comes from, but you can't feel that way. It's just, they're in their own mind and they're in their own mindset. And if they're going to do it, they're going to do it regardless of, even if you have helped them and reached out to them, it's just something. I mean, you have the one person that is like, you know what, I don't want to do this. Who's proactive and handles their business and, does what they need to do. But I just think that, it's just how it is. I mean, you can't feel guilt. You can't feel shamed that, your loved one, your friend, whoever took their life. Like, it's just not, it just is unfortunate and it sucks. And you have to remember they were an amazing person and they were not their mental illness.
Yeah. I guess so for me, like, my friend was a senior in high school when he passed and I was a junior. So what, I guess because you said your mom kind of struggled your whole childhood. So what would your, I guess, advice be like high schoolers or college kids, whether they're suffering or their friends are suffering?
Don't be afraid. And like, I think fear is a huge thing. because you don't want to be labeled as crazy. You don't
Yeah.
want to be labeled as some emotional
Or
nutcase
weak
person.
or yeah.
Right. And so I think like, don't be afraid to ask for help. And
Yeah.
I know that's easier said than done because
But
I'm stubborn. You know, if I've got 105 fever, I'm not going to the hospital. I'm just going to wait it out and see what happens.
it's my time. It's my time.
Right. But I think that, you know, your life is worth so much more, and you are put on this earth for some reason, and you need to just, you know, push through it, get over your fear of asking for help, and ask for help, reach out. You know, if you're afraid to go to your parents, find a trusted person
Yeah.
that will not judge you, because I know judgment is huge for high school kids. Like
Yeah.
I think about how dumb that is now. Like, I've been graduated high school for 25 years, which is just insane to me. Like, I feel like I was just like 17 yesterday, you know?
Yeah.
And I just remember feeling that judgment and trying to keep up with what everybody else is doing, and, you know, trying to
They're
hide.
wearing their clothes.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
worrying about, oh my gosh, this boy doesn't want to, you know, go out with me, or, you know, my best friend quit talking to me and we had a fight. Like, that's so trivial in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
Like, life is amazing even at the hardest moments, and life is worth living even at the hardest moments. Like, all the hard moments I've had in my life, I've learned tons of lessons from. I mean,
Yeah.
infinity lessons, you know, and all that stuff in high school doesn't matter. You won't use math
Nope.
unless,
Nope.
yeah,
Nope.
unless you're in a job that requires it, like you're a scientist or an engineer. But don't be afraid to reach out. I mean, even to a trusted teacher, or just someone you trust, because they care about you and will make sure that you are taken care of.
Yeah.
Whether it's, you know, therapy is amazing, whether it's, you know, medications, whatever it is. You know, maybe you're really artistic and you can paint and that's your outlet, or maybe you enjoy sports and that's your outlet, you know,
Mhm.
because you really need those outlets when you're growing up, and you really need people to talk to.
I think I just turned 25, and last year for my
Oh, you're so
birthday,
young.
I know, for my birthday, I literally got myself therapy. Like, I'm like, it's time. Like, I'm over all the stigma. Like, I'm like, it's time. Like, after all these years,
Yeah.
I've been like talking to friends and family. And what was so weird for me is like, even that initial meeting, she was like, oh, so you went through this trauma and you went through this trauma and you went through that. And I was like, as a kid, like, I guess I never realized what trauma was, or what trauma is,
Right.
or what. And I'm like, it's not taught in school, but I'm like, there's reasons why people, like, your mind reacts and heals the way that it does, and how memories form. And I'm like, I'm sure like your brain's just so young that you don't grasp the concept of, hey, this actually impacts me for years.
Right.
And I'm like, I wish I would have known that younger, because I'm like, 5 years ago, it was like, well, why do I think like this? Or why am I so sad? Or why can't I process this? I'm like, because it's
Right.
your mind really
Your
doesn't
brain
let
is so
you.
young.
But I
Right.
want
And, you know,
to
I have a friend.
go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh no, go ahead,
But
go
I
ahead.
have a friend who, she is a friend I've known since high school. And her sister, her son, and I think he might have been 16, just took his own life, like maybe a couple months ago. And I don't know if he was autistic, or if there was something going, you know, I don't know. But I'm like, but you're 16.
Yeah.
Like, there's so, or like, you know, the one girl who videoed her hanging from the tree.
Yeah.
Um, or, you know, like, oh, this happened. There's so much more than your little high school bubble. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know, you know, I don't know how you can tell, you know, I get it. Like, everything means so much to you at that point in your life. That's your world. But the world is so much bigger than that. Like, there's so much life and adventures to have, and there's so many things to do, that's not the end of it. Like, I think about stupid stuff from high school, And when I went to my 20-year high school reunion, nobody cared about any of that stuff. Like the girls that you thought were like the stuck-up girls who were popular and wouldn't talk to you, we're just talking with everybody. Like nobody cares. Like they've had their own struggles in life up to that point.
Yeah.
You know, you're at that point, you're what, 37, 38. You've had all sorts of life to that point.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, still, I'm at 42 and I still don't know a lot of things, you know,
Yeah,
like
you and I both.
Yeah, like our kids, they're my kids. They're Ethan just turned 24, I think, and Marley just turned 22.
Okay.
And they had a really hard time in high school. And I'm like, but life is so much more bigger than just this.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm like, wait, so even if you don't go to college, I'm like, there's so many, whatever your group is or whatever your passion is, like there's a group for it, or advocacy or club or
yeah. You know, even the kids, you know, and bullying makes me really angry because it's, you know, especially in 2022, it shouldn't be a thing.
Yeah.
You know, we've realized people are different. Everybody has their own thing. But there's the kids that are, you know, the band kids who get picked on.
Yep.
You know what? That person might go on to play for the Philharmonic, or that person might go play for the orchestra in London. You know, like, don't pick on them. Don't be mean to them. But on the other side, like, to the band kid, you are amazing.
Yeah.
You are playing an instrument I couldn't play. You know, you might not be able to play it. Someone, you know, like,
yeah,
your life is valued and you are cared about. And, you know, don't let what's happening in your little high school bubble affect you, because there's just so much more to life. And I know it's hard. Like every problem is so huge, but take it from someone who, like, I think I had a hard time because I think puberty is just hard on everybody. And you know, I would say I probably went through a weird depressive phase. I mean, it was the 90s.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, Kurt Cobain had killed himself, and that was a huge thing. I was like 14,
Yeah.
you know, getting ready to turn 15. That was huge for my generation. And I just think, like, it's, you know, especially when you're going through puberty and you're going through like junior high and you're trying to figure stuff out and you're just in this weird, awkward place, and like, just hang on, because it's going to get better.
Yeah, it's just 4 years, and that sounds forever, but
it goes quick.
Yeah.
Like, time goes, don't wish your life away. One other piece of advice I would give, don't wish your life away. Like, because when you're young, oh, I want to be 16 so I can drive. And then when you're 16, I want to be 18. And then when you're 18, I want to be 21. And
yeah,
like, we all do it.
And then you're like, I want to be married. I want to have kids. I want to,
Right.
Yeah.
Time goes so quick. Like, I never believed that, but my great grandma used to tell me that. She's like, don't wish your life away, because time goes so fast.
I think I needed to hear that.
Yes, you need to hear this
at work, where it's like, what was it? Just a few months ago, I'm like, I just want to, like, I started getting super anxious at work, and I was like, I just want to be a kid. Like, I'm like, I love the responsibilities, but I'm like, I just want to be a kid, where I'm like, what's for dinner? Like,
right.
What am I watching on Netflix?
Adulting is hard, but you know, on one end, on the other end of that, there's no rules for us.
Yeah.
If you want to have cake for dinner, you can have cake for dinner. Right? If you want to like have cereal, you can have, like, the cool thing with being an adult, and this is taking me a long time to realize, is there's no rules. There's nobody being like, hey, you have to do this. So, like, yes, enjoy your teenage years, and just know that when you hit adulthood, just be a good person, and there's no rules. As long as you know, do what's good for you.
Yeah.
You know, like, just be a good person. But I think the mental health fear is a huge thing, because people, and you know, you don't want to be made fun of. Yeah. Oh, you're 17 and you're on, you know, Lexapro, or yeah.
Who cares?
Don't be afraid. Yeah. Yeah. You know what? If that medicine makes your life easier, do it. Like, who knows what you could grow up to be?
Yeah.
You know, you could be the next president. You could be a movie star. You could be in a band. I mean, you know, there's no limit to life when you're young.
Yeah.
Like sky is truly the limit when you're a
Yeah.
young kid. And I don't think a lot of kids realize that. Like you can be whatever you want to be.
Yeah.
There's no limit. And it's easier said than done because I know financial stuff comes into play.
But I'm like with social media, I'm like, it's so people get like big off of the most random videos. Like,
right. Like I'm opening a can of chips and like I'm a big TikTok star now. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Or even like,
weird.
I remember in high school, like we always had like the people who would draw anime. But I'm like, anime is so big. I'm like, look how many freaking movies there are, like that are out right now, or books, or I'm like, anime is so in.
Right. I mean, there's something for everybody, you know, like it just makes me sad to see young people struggling so hard with things because I know like the world is such a weird place, you know, like you're young and you're dealing with wars and you're dealing with pandemics and you're dealing with all this weird stuff. And like, you got to put it into a different perspective of, and I'm going to sound like a boomer, but like, you know, I think about my grandparents because my grandpa was born in 1928 and he fought in Korea. But I think about, you know, you were a little kid. My dad was born during World War II, but like, you know, you were a little kid when this happened. You know, you got to think about past generations too, and all that they went through and how they overcome those things and how they overcame those things. Like, you know, my generation went through some weird stuff. Like, you know, we went through like the first Iraq war in the early 90s. And then, you know, that's, you know, high school shootings started happening 2 years after I graduated high school. Like Columbine happened in 99. And that kind of kicked it off, you know, and like all these weird, and like all these weird things, you know, you just kind of have to put it into perspective because this is like, you're going through history. You're living in history right now. So when you get older, because you're going to take your medicine and you're going to go get therapy. So when you're an old person and you have grandkids, you can be like, man, we had this crazy war happen. Russia invaded Ukraine and we had a pandemic. And for 2 years, we
literally had to live in our houses.
Like, I mean, you just kind of have to look at that and be like, man, I lived through some crazy stuff, but you can't do that if you take your life at 17.
Yeah. I have one last question for you. I want to like end on a good
note. I can chat like all day.
What is your favorite memory of your mom?
Oh, favorite memory of my mom. See, I tried to sit down last night and think about all this stuff. And I like my ADD kicked in and I'm like, but I can't do this right now. I don't know. I have a lot of favorite memories with her. Like like shopping with her was such an experience. Like, and I think I mentioned that in my post that I post on Instagram. Like, it's not a favorite memory, but it's just one I always think about, like being a little kid and being drug around in the store, up and down every single aisle so she could, you know, get everything. And I just hated it. But now that I'm older, I'm like, man, I wish I could do that again with her. Just like, let's go up and down the store aisles and, you know, like just to do that. Or her laugh was pretty amazing. She had a great laugh. It was more like a cackle.
Yeah.
And, you know, she would laugh at like the funniest stuff, you know, she would make up words. Like instead of saying like suave and debonair, she would say suave and debonair. Like, I mean, she just said like weird, like in Walmart to us was Wally World. Like she would call it Wally World for some reason. Like she would just make up her own words. And she did have a really good sense of humor. I think that's, you know, one of my favorite things about her. But favorite memories, like there's like too many, you know, like, okay. Funny story that I think this is actually my one of my favorites. Okay. My dad was in the Navy and we had gone, this was like 93, 94. It seems like a lot of stuff happened for me around that time. but we had gone down to San Diego for a retirement of like one of the master chiefs or a senior chief. I can't remember who it was for. And so my parents were letting me go with them, which was really cool, you know? And so we went down to San Diego, and so many things happened to us. One of the ladies took us to Tijuana.
Oh gosh.
I was terrified. Like, I'm a teenage girl and I'm just terrified because I've never been I've traveled around to like different states, but I've never been to Mexico. And Tijuana is just a cool, it's a cool place, but it's, now I'm older, it's cool, but I was a little kid and I was terrified, like,
yeah.
What are you doing? And we made it through unscathed. We ended up having to take a taxi in Tijuana to get back to our train. And my mom was like, oh my gosh, we're going to die, because there's no traffic lights. There's nothing, and we're like going through the street, and the guy is like just driving like a bat out of hell. Yeah. And I was like, we're going to die. And that was a very good experience. And the same trip, we were on our way to the retirement, dressed up, because you have to, wear like fancy clothes, and a bird had pooped on both of us on our way to the retirement party, and we're dressed to the nines. I have a picture somewhere around here. Let me grab it for you. It's a great picture. Not my favorite. Don't mind me being the awkward teenage kid that I am in this picture. Let me just tell you, like, I've come a long way.
You and I both. It's okay.
13, 14 is a rough age, man, for kids. I don't know if I can get it out of the frame. I don't think I can, but it's kind of dirty. So don't mind the awkwardness. Gosh. So the bird had either pooped on me or her, and then we had hit shoulders and ended up spreading it between ourselves. And it was bright green, right? It was like this color. Like, it was this color. And she had white on, so you could totally see it on her. And we just sat and we just laughed about it.
Okay, like, what are you supposed to do?
Right. Well, in our car, if I remember, that's the trip too. We had stopped in Vegas on our way, and our car had gotten broken into. Yeah. So the outfits we were going to buy got stolen out of the car. So we had to buy whole new outfits, and then a bird ends up pooping on us, and it was amazing. So, it was great. It was a good time for us. Like, it really was. It was fun. We had a good time. But she was just fun. Like, she just had a really contagious laugh. She would, when I lived on my own, we were always going shopping together. And, we had a rough patch when her and my dad got divorced and she moved away. But, we had a good time as I got older. And I really am sad that she has missed out on so much. Not having a mom at 30 up, there's things I can't ask her. There's advice I can't get. And now with my dad gone, it's double. And so it's like, you're missing out on a lot of things. Like, it's just weird. I don't know. It's just weird.
With the grandkids and being there, and retirement and traveling and spring breaks and
right. And I noticed, like, when I notice she's missing the most is when I'm trying to remember like one of her recipes or something. You know what I mean? Like she cooked like the best food ever. I mean, her fried chicken was amazing. She made awesome meals. And I can't call her and be like, hey, I need your advice on this, situation. And it's really weird. And like, I'll call my aunt, her sister, and see if she remembers any of the stuff.
Same.
It's not the same. And it's just weird, like, and just life experiences. And I think that her dying at 54, and me being in my early 40s, like when I get to that point and I pass her age, that's going to be even more weird. Like, you died, 54 is young. Like, I know like, I know it's old, but it's young.
But it's still young.
Yeah. And so I just think that's weird. That's like one of the times I miss her the most. Or like I'll be listening, like I'll be on my way somewhere, and I'll smell like stale smoke. And I'm like, because she was a cigarette smoker, and that I'm like, yep, I
Mom,
love that smell. Yep,
mom,
that's mom. Or like she was into 70s music. Because she was a hippie back in the, she was in
yeah.
high school. And so like a Led Zeppelin song will come on or something. And I'm like, okay, this is cool. you know, or any kind of that music would come on, and I'm just like, all right, I
I
get it.
always take those as like weird signs. I'm like, they're still watching, like they're still with us.
Yeah.
And I wish that they were here, but
Oh,
I'm glad for the like small moments that
yes,
I'm still gonna remember
I
them.
agree. Yeah, and like I feel like she's around sometimes, as weird as that sounds, but like my dad was a mother hen in death or in life, and he is in death. So I feel like if he were to be around more, it would be him.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like it's just weird. It's just super weird. And like, and continuing to remember her, obviously my plants, I have,
Yep.
um, she had a huge green thumb and she loved plants. And so I think I've kind of unwittingly carried that along with me. But like I keep pictures of her and I in my wallet behind my driver's license. And that's, I try and think about her probably every day.
Yeah.
Like what would you like and my thing too is like what would you look like, because she would be 66 right now, I think. And I'm like, I know you'd have wrinkles because you were a cigarette smoker, but
Yeah.
like would you have great hair? Would you be vain and dye your hair? Like
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
like what would you look like? So it's really weird, but I mean, that's another thing to think about for kids. Like don't make people wonder like how you would be as you get older. Get to that point.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Oh, it totally does. And I always like I love doing these videos, but I hate them because I'm like, I hate that we can connect on this point, but
right.
yeah.
And it's a sad club. Like you never want to be a part of this club. And it's unfortunate. And my cousin, my aunt, her sister took her life in the early 80s. And so my cousin and I are in this weird club, and she was young. She was like, I don't remember, like maybe 5, 6,
Yeah.
somewhere around there when my aunt died. And I've had several friends. We actually just had a trooper up in, I think it was in Central Oregon, who killed himself on duty yesterday.
Oh my gosh.
Which is so sad, like going through a divorce and just couldn't take it. And I'm like, but it's just, you can get through it. It sucks. There
Yeah.
are things in this life that suck, but you can make it through.
Yeah.
As much as you are like, oh, my life is over and I don't want to deal with this. Like, it's just a small blip on the screen of life, like
Yeah.
just a minor issue compared to what, other people are going through.
Yeah. And comparing to what you could have or what you could find. I'm like, life changes so quick.
Yeah. Like, I mean, we've been here for 2 years, and our plan was not, we took our plan a little quick because my husband retired at 40 in 2019 from his law enforcement job.
Yeah.
I left my law enforcement job right at the beginning of the pandemic. Because I'm like, let's just get this going. Like, let's just get our Oregon dream going. And now we run a dog training business, and we live in Oregon, and like life is good. And if I look at my 17-year-old self and my crush isn't reciprocating, how I feel, and then I look at myself to now, I would not have believed at 17 that I would be where I'm at now.
Yeah.
Life changes so fast. What you think you might end up doing might not really be what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like I had a different career plan, for myself at that age, and I didn't do it, and it took me somewhere different, and I'm glad it did.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's, I think, something that you have to look forward to. And it's hard to see that through the black veil of depression, like you have to work with it, and you just have to make it through and just get through that as hard as it is,
Yeah.
and get to where you want to be.
Well, I appreciate all of your comments and advice.
Yes.